So first let's compare the engines. The 200 is basically a 195cc air-cooled 4-stroke engine, and the 230 is a 223cc air-cooled engine. They're built on basically the same platform, but the 230 has noticeably more torque on the low end. So how this compares on the trail, it's just a little bit easier to pop up over logs and rocks, or if you're a heavier rider, it just pulls you a little bit better. They're both super smooth. The XR200, the power curve is just like flat, where the CRF230F, it kind of builds up real quickly and kind of tapers out, and they both have very similar horsepower. And they're both a little bit lean from the factory, so some simple jetting mods such as going a little bit richer on the jetting can help both of them get you an extra horsepower or two and better throttle response, as well as easier starting. Moving on to do the suspension. The stock suspension on both bikes are very close to the same, depending on which year you get. The forks are not adjustable. They're pretty soft, nice and plush, which is nice if you're learning how to ride, not going very fast, just casually riding on the trails. They soak up the bumps really well. And then the rear shock, there's no adjustment other than the preload, so adjusting your sag, which is really important if you want it comfortable and the suspension balanced for your weight. You get more traction and better control when you set it up for your weight. The problem is there's no adjustment other than that on most years. Now the earlier 1986 to 91 XR200, it had the older style suspension, which had a little bit more travel, a little better performance, and there's some damping clickers which you could adjust to get a little bit better comfort, whether you want to go a little bit stiffer or a little bit softer on the rear shock and the front forks. The problem is they're getting harder to find, so they often need to be rebuilt or they're just worn out. And then moving on to the ergonomics, so how the bike feels. The XR200 has a really nice cushy banana seat. It's really nice if you like to sit down a lot, so you won't get a sore bum on a long trail ride. The problem is if you want to have proper technique, it's a little bit harder because you kind of, it's slanted downwards, so you kind of naturally slide up towards the tank, and this kind of gives you that cramped feeling because your knees are so close to the handlebars and your feet are so close to the pegs. And then the tank is also a little bit wider because it's bigger. Where the CRF230F, it's a little bit more modern. The seat is definitely harder, so not as comfortable, but it's flatter. It's a little slimmer. It feels a little bit easier to handle, even though it's heavier, which I'll get to that in just a second, but you won't slide up forward. You won't feel like you're in the bike like the XR200. You'll feel like you're riding on the bike on the 230, if that makes sense. So the CRF230F is definitely more motocross enduro bike ergonomics or feel when you're riding it. Moving to the weight, the CRF230F, due to the electric start and just other things that make it a little bit heavier, it's about 25 pounds heavier than the 200. And you don't really notice that much more weight when you're riding it on the trails, but when you go to pick it up or push it around on the trailer or on your truck, you definitely notice that weight. So if you're trying to decide between these two and you're not very strong and you want the lightest bike, the XR200 is definitely the way to go. It feels like an oversized mountain bike with an engine. And then the starting system. So if you don't mind old school kick starting, the XR200 is really nice because when it's jetted properly, it's pretty easy to start, especially if you have a good kick starting technique. Whereas the CRF230, it has electric start with no backup kickstart, where some people are like, oh, I need to have a backup kickstarter, because you need to have a backup crank start on your car too. So as long as you have a properly charged battery, you're not letting it get drained down too low, you're not going to have a problem with the electric start on this dirt bike. I've been out in the mountains in the middle of nowhere many times, never had a problem. And my battery just died, but the electric start isn't really a problem as long as you keep the battery maintained, so as long as it has a charge. So if it's weak, you need to replace it or charge it. Neither of these bikes are being made anymore, so that means you're going to have to buy a used one. So that means you're going to be dealing with people selling junk. But I want to show you the 5 most common mistakes that people make when buying a dirt bike that causes them to end up with a pile of junk or something that's not worth as much as they thought it was because it needs a lot more work. And you can download my free guide to fix these mistakes at motocrosshideout.com/buyer. The link is in the description below, and I look forward to making you a better, safer, smarter rider so that you can stay safe and have fun for years to come.